Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our 2022 webinar, Supporting BIPOC Executive Leadership, a Revolutionary Imperative. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, the Senior Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. My hair is braided and pulled back. I have pearl, bow earrings that are a little bit dangly, and a black turtleneck. So before we begin our 90-minute dialogue style webinar, please take a moment to review the Zoom features so that you have an optimal experience with us today. If you would like your experience to include closed captioning, you can look to the bottom of your screen and select captions and show subtitles. So that's an option for you if you'd like that. Also, you'll notice there is the chat function should be to your right, or if it's not to your right, look to the bottom where it says chat, click there and it'll show up. If you have questions for the tech team, if you have any tech issues, you can direct them in the chat to our tech team. Also, if you have questions for our presenters throughout the presentation, you can use the chat as well. Just be specific about who the question is for so we make sure to direct it appropriately. Okay, so in the wake of 2020's racial upheavals, many predominantly and historically white institutions began to hire BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color to serve in executive leadership roles. Those organizations that successfully hired BIPOC executive directors were frequently viewed as most revolutionary, transformative, and inspiring within the field. Yet structural and systemic challenges rooted in white supremacy, racism, and sexism, particularly impactful for women of color, consistently prevented BIPOC executive directors from doing their jobs and even living out the terms of their contract. So in this specific session, we begin to unpack the questions: how do we mitigate the negative experiences leaders of color face when charged to lead historically white organizations? How do we support executive leaders of color physically, emotionally, and financially within systems that consistently fail to provide the resources they need for success? So those are the questions we'll be addressing today. And we are so glad to have Kelly Adduci, Executive Director of Dance USA, Anne Huang, Executive Director of World Arts West, and Kaisha Johnson, Founding Director of Women of Color in the Arts. And if you joined us for our 2022 Grantmakers in the Arts Conference, this is a continuation of the conversation that they so eloquently started there. It was such a powerful conversation that day, and we're so excited to continue it on. So right now, I'm going to kick it over to Kaisha to get us started.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much, Sherilyn. Thank you so much, GIA. Yes, I'm reading the chats too, and it's like, no waiting period should ever be this fun. It should always be this fun. Actually, thank you all for being here. For those of you that were here in our conference session during GIA, GIA had a playlist, and Beyonce's Break My Soul was on that playlist. And I said, that feels appropriate. And I think it still feels appropriate as we are moving through this moment. Because the conversation of today is about talking about supporting Black and Brown leaders of color. And if you have listened to Beyonce's lyrics, if you're in the Beehive and have really listened to the lyrics, it says, I just quit my job. I'm gonna find new drive. Damn, they work me so hard, work by 9, then off past 5. Then they work my nerves. That's why I cannot sleep at night. I'm feeling that deeply right now. I am feeling that deeply right now. But I think that what she is alluding to, I'm going to imagine what she's alluding to are the systems, not necessarily the people, although that's real too, that create the environment that don't allow us folks, and I'm speaking of folks of the Black, Indigenous, people of color community, as members of our organizations and as leaders to thrive. As a matter of fact, I'm going to posit that these systems with the unconscious and conscious support of people do the opposite. And that's what we're going to talk about today. These systems create harmful environments that damage our spirits, that damage our psyches and our drive and our determination to help create lasting legacies for our organizations and for the communities in which we serve, or that we're elected to serve. So how do we, those in our arts and culture sector, specifically inside of philanthropy, support BIPOC leaders that are often facing insurmountable challenges connected to these systems of oppression, namely, as Sherilyn read in our description, that we're talking about racism and white supremacy, and for women in particular, sexism too. And so that's the conversation that we are going to delve into today. I know that you all signed up for a webinar, and I'm going to encourage you to take notes, but I want to let you know that this isn't going to be like 5 quick steps to retaining Black and Brown leadership. It's not that. But this is going to be, let's listen and pay attention to leaders of color to better understand their experiences so we can best understand how to show up for them, how to show up for them emotionally, how to show up for them physically, and how to show up for them financially. All right, we good? Great, I like that thumbs up. So I'm Kaisha Johnson, founding director of Women of Color in the Arts, or WOCA as it's affectionately known. WOCA is a national grassroots organization that's dedicated to uplifting and supporting leaders of color and creating equitable systems for us all to thrive inside and outside of the arts. I want to, again, welcome all of you, and I want to lift up our speakers that are here today. Kelly Aduse, the Executive Director of Dance USA, and Ann Wong, who is the Executive Director of World Arts West. Say hello, ladies. Both of these fabulous, dynamic women and leaders have been and will continuously and generously share their time and energy, reliving some past and current experiences so that we might learn from them, so that we can evolve and hopefully shift systems. But before we get into that, I want to take a moment for an ancestor and land acknowledgement. This is something as practice that Women of Color in the Arts does. We always start any gathering with an acknowledgement of our ancestors in the land. It's a practice that we've put in place for many years now. And I just want to give thanks to all of those that came before us, all of those that laid the foundation for our very existence and navigated spaces where they were not only unseen, but unwelcome. And so WOCA begins each gathering by acknowledging the indigenous people of this land. And so should you. Please feel free to drop in the chat the original stewards of the land in which you currently reside. I think there's something been dropped in the chat for you, a link if you do not know. In the case of where I am currently, I want to personally acknowledge the Karankawas and the Akokisas, who were the original inhabitants of this place we call Houston, Texas. Since we pull from and often exploit the natural resources of the land across the country, that these tribes serve as the stewards of, we appreciate these nations, not only their historical sacrifices, but their modern day ones too. In acknowledging stolen land, we would be woefully remiss if we did not also acknowledge stolen people, enslaved Africans that were kidnapped from their homelands and brought here to these stolen lands. Those humans, my ancestors, and perhaps some of yours on this call, that were trafficked across an ocean, and that with their skill and their expertise and their unpaid labor built a nation and its economy in what is now known as the United States of America. All of these acts, from the theft of land to the theft of human beings, created this faulty foundation of a country built on the back of the oppressed and the exploited. So thank you all for dropping in the chat where it is you reside, on whose lands you reside on. And since we are experiencing this gathering online today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor our digital landscape. The acknowledgement that I'd like to share was crafted by theater maker and producer Adrian Wong, and I'm going to read it for you here. It says, Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of what we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous people worldwide. So thank you, Adrienne Wong, for that. So in essence, WOCA takes the time to acknowledge Native land and the peoples that labored on it in order to show both honor and respect. We understand that acknowledgement in this country, however, acknowledgement is a small gesture, and it's a first step. It's a first step towards healing. It's a first step towards reconciliation. It's a first step towards reparation. And ultimately, it's a first step towards liberation. And it represents our commitment to history telling, to truth telling, to honoring present day obstacles, and to standing in solidarity with all oppressed and marginalized people. And so here we are today, speaking of folks' authentic narratives. Thank you all for participating in this acknowledgement. Please continue to do that acknowledgement inside of your own communities, inside of your own organizations. But since we are here to talk about people's authentic narratives, I want to pass the spotlight to our featured speakers, Kelly Aduse of Dance USA and Anne Wong of World Arts West. Hi, ladies. I'm going to give you a brief introduction because I often say that a lot of times, we hear about people or we read about people, but we don't hear it ourselves. And I want to give y'all the flowers while you are still here because you are very accomplished women and all these folks should know that as well. So Kelly Aduse became the executive director of Dance USA in 2021. She joined Dance USA in the fall of 2008 as the organization's office manager and board liaison, and was promoted to director of member services in the spring of 2009, maintaining her work as board liaison until 2019. In her time at Dance USA, Kelly has designed and implemented the membership fellowship, an opportunity for early career administrators to hone their skills, the special member package, a recruitment campaign that surpassed goal and engaged the entire Dance USA board and team in the process, and a new revenue stream maximizing Dance USA's monthly bulletin. She was part of the initial design team of Dance USA's Dance Business Bootcamp, which I was a part of as a facilitator back in the day, a program for dance artists working with budgets of $200,000 and below. Currently, Kelly serves on the advisory board for Women of Color in the Arts. Woohoo, thank you. I see a lot of welcome members in the house today. Cheers to you, thanks for being here. Kelly recently rotated off the C Chicago Dance's board of directors, where she was chair of its governance committee, and is also a former member of Dance Exchange's board of directors. Additionally, Kelly has been a member of Jacob's Pillow, Bates Dance Festival, and Movement Research's dance communities. She's an alumna of Art Equity's 2020 BIPOC Leadership Circle and of American Express's Leadership Academy. So let me go on to Anne, and then we're going to come back with the things, all the things. That sound all right? Dr. Anne Wong is a seasoned arts executive and a highly regarded culturally specific capacity building consultant and resource equity advocate. In 2019, Anne was appointed the first person of color, immigrant, and San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival artist to lead World Arts West. Under Anne's equity and inclusion focus, World Arts has embarked on a new horizon. What is that horizon? We're going to soon find out. For the first time since 1978, World Arts West board and staff are now majority BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, reflecting the diversity of its artist community. By centering the voices of cultural artists, Anne works to empower everyone to make present, revolutionary, new artworks and uplift underrepresented voices and stories. Anne is the former executive director of Oakland Asian Cultural Center, where she transformed OACC from a struggling arts organization into a leading cultural institution serving 50,000 people per year. Anne has served in leadership roles for National Dance Project's Regional Dance Development Initiative, New York Foundation for the Arts Immigrant Artist Program, and the City of Oakland's Mayoral Arts Task Force. She is the board chair of Dance USA Board of Trustees. So let's give these ladies their flowers, because one, they've done some incredible work in their short amount of time on this earth. And two, they're still here doing it, doing the work. And I just read some of the abridged versions of you all's professional biographies. And you, as I said, are both some very accomplished women, aptly primed to lead any organization. I know prior to this session and in the session that we did during the conference, some of the discussions that led up to this conversation, one of the things that we said that we wanted to do was to center our individual and collective humanity. And I think one of the most impactful ways to do that is through narrative, through sharing our stories. And so that's why we're here. So the question I'm going to pose to you two are, recognizing your own humanity in and outside of your space, who are you? Tell us your story. Tell us your story in occupying predominantly white spaces and how that's impacted your professional life and role as a leader. And then tell us a little bit about what your journey to leading a historically white institution has looked like. And whoever wants to go first.
Well, Anne, if it's okay, I'll jump in first. And first of all, I just want to say to everyone, forgive me, I've got a little bit of sniffles here. I'm getting over a cold, catching a cold, who knows what it is. My name is Kelly Aduse, Executive Director of Dance USA. I'm a non-disabled butterscotch skin cisgender woman. I use she, her pronouns. And today I'm wearing a burnt orange top with my hair pulled back, tight in a bun at the nape of my neck. I am wearing glasses today. And the lip color I've chosen is a bright red. I am zooming in today as a guest on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Muskogee people. And I also want to uplift the Native and Indigenous people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ottawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations. It is on their land, also as a guest, where I regularly live, work, play, and love. And many Native communities also called and still do call the land home, and that's in Chicago, that has the third largest urban Native American population in the US. I am going to share about my journey, but I do just want to kind of prime this a little bit for folks who may not know about Dance USA. Dance USA is the national service organization for dance, serving a very broad cross-section of the dance ecosystem, from dance company executives to artistic directors to agents, students, to dance presenters, to other dance service organizations, and many more. Our work is driven by our vision, our belief that dance can inspire a more just and humane world, and as such, Dance USA will amplify the power of dance to inform and inspire a nation where creativity and the field can thrive. And we do have core programs that are focused in the areas of leadership and learning, advocacy, research, and preservation, which are all designed and conducted through the framework of our core values, which are creativity, connectivity, equity, and integrity. During our prep conversations, I always jumped in on this, Kaisha is asking us who we are. And I'm so grateful for that, because it's a pretty provocative, in my opinion, question to ask, one that should not be provocative, but I think that all too often we're not asked who we are, we're asked what we do. And I think that all too often our titles and what we do get wrapped up in our identities. And so we start to equate what we do with who we are rather than simply focusing on who we are and how that impacts what we do. So I just appreciate Kaisha centering our humanity and centering who we are at our core. A couple of aspects that I just want to share also with folks that Dance USA is in its 40th year. And in 40 years, which we are celebrating this year, I am the first BIPOC executive director to lead the organization. And I'm also the first to come into the role with a family. And I'm naming these two characteristics at the onset because inherently, immediately, I'm bumping up into a very set codified structure that will have to change in order for me to thrive in this role. And I also want to name the expectations of being a leader in this role, whether spoken or unspoken, will also need to change. I am starting at a very different place than my predecessors, which I can also name and appreciate is an asset for me. And yet, when I consider how I, as the leader, shift paradigms in order to center BIPOC individuals, to center our humanity within our organization and every day, the amount of additional energy, stamina, being fully present, being consistent, being persistent, that is required and necessary in order to move Dance USA toward fully manifesting the transformational, long-lasting change that is needed to ensure the organization fully evolves into an equitable, inclusive, just, liberated environment is way more than what my predecessors experienced because the systems were designed for them to thrive. And I say all of this, and the personal background for me is that this notion of having to work harder than everyone else and having higher expectations pressed upon me is not new for me. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and throughout my entire educational life, from elementary school until college, I was always in predominantly white private schools around very privileged folks financially and socially. And in elementary, middle school, and high school, I typically, if not always, often was the only Black child in any of my classes, and always the only Black female. And that actually did not change until college. I never had a Black teacher until college. So existing consistently in environments where I felt like maybe I didn't quite fit in, or I felt like I did not fully belong, were times where I was definitely othered and also silenced, has been a consistent experience for me. At the same time I was having my educational experience, I was also having my dance experience. And what that meant for me was that I started out taking ballet classes. And yes, again, I was the only Black or brown face in those classes. None of my teachers were Black or brown. And I remember distinctly, because it was one of those moments in your life that just impresses upon you. When I was taking classes at the Washington Ballet and how I was drawn to one of the dancers who came into our studio a couple of times and worked with our class. And she was very fair-skinned like myself. And I remember how I mentally responded to her. You know, I finally was seeing someone who looked like me leading the class and directing the class. And that was just really comforting and energizing, and to be quite honest, freeing. But she was not a consistent aspect of the class. I did eventually leave practicing ballet, but I still continued to dance. And when I graduated college, I did move back to Washington, D.C., and I was hired by Dance USA. When I joined the team, I was the only BIPOC team member for several years. And the moment when things really started to shift was at our 2012 conference in San Francisco. This was a pivotal moment for the organization, pivotal and painful. The theme of that conference was diversity. And at the time, we didn't distinctly identify or define what it meant, what we meant by diversity. And in reflection, I realized maybe in that time we as people and as an industry didn't have all the words or the language to define what we really meant and what we wanted to talk about and how to frame the conversations appropriately. At that conference, there was a group of Black dancers and artists who were encouraged to attend the conference. There had been lots of relationship building leading up to the conference. And when they got there, they realized that the environment was not for them. It was not designed for them. It was not welcoming for them. And during our closing session, one of the individuals stood up and started yelling about how Dance USA had missed the mark on diversity. And again, talk about moments that really imprint in your brain. I was pregnant at the time, so I was feeling a little extra vulnerable. I was sitting directly in front of the individual who was yelling. And in that moment, I felt this duality or this dichotomy of shame and anger. And maybe the anger was rooted in disappointment. I felt shame because I was in front of this guy and thinking like, oh my gosh, he's screaming, he's yelling. I wanted to go crawl into a hole. And I just kept asking myself, because I am a part of this team, did I feel him too? And on the other side, I was really angry at the organization for not defining what we meant by diversity, for not caring for the individuals that we were encouraging to come into our community. Fast forward years later, 2018, we adopted a very forward-thinking strategic plan that re-articulated our mission and our vision, and for the first time in our history, centered core values, which I named earlier. So my history has impacted the why I get up every morning and I choose to lead this organization. Because I am a bridge in our work between where we were and where we are going. And I very much intend to deepen our equity, inclusion, justice, and liberation work, and to be more intentionally inclusive of the entire dance ecosystem so that anyone coming in feels a deep sense of belonging.
Yeah, that's powerful, Kelly. I thank you for naming who you are, all the things that you are. We have a short amount of time, so I imagine that the list goes on, but mother, caregiver, dancer, scholar, leader, and my favorite, bridge. I love that analogy. We're going to circle back because I have lots of questions. But let's get Ann in here. Ann, I'm going to pose the same question to you. Who are you? Who are you?
So first, thank you, Kaisha, for encouraging us to show up with our authentic whole selves today. Everyone, I'm Ann Huang. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of War Arts West, a 44-year-old organization that serves 450 cultural dance companies, the largest multicultural dance network in the United States, as a dance presenter and artist service organization. Today, I'm joining you from the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone, beautiful Oakland, California. I'm a Taiwanese American female with shoulder-length black hair, brown highlights. I'm wearing a black blouse with white embroidery and white earrings. I have bright red lipstick on today. For today's conversation, what I really wanted to share in this section is my own BIPOC ED journey at World Arts West, and have an honest dialogue with everyone about how we can collectively support BIPOC EDs and the institutions they lead. I'm going to begin by briefly sharing my own origin story. I'm originally from Taiwan and moved to the United States with my family at age 12. Our family moved to escape political persecution during a long era of martial law in Taiwan from 1949 to 1987. As Kaisha said, my arts career started about 20 years ago at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center. Since then, I've been working with many cultural artists, and many are immigrants and refugees, presenting, fundraising, capacity building, resource equity advocacy. I am now working with different funders to create programs and craft guidelines that are relevant and equitable to the BIPOC communities today. Next, I'm going to share my story of entering and leading a historically white-led institution that on the outside may not appear as the white institution. My story is not alone and is similar to the journeys of many BIPOC EDs, probably some of your grantees. And yet many BIPOC EDs have been hesitant and afraid to share their stories with funders. Today is only the second time I'm sharing my BIPOC ED journey at a gathering of funders, the first being the GIA conference in October of this year. I started working at World Arts West in 2015 and became the executive director in 2019. I'm the first BIPOC and cultural artist to lead this organization. While World Arts West was founded in 1978 to serve a large, diverse BIPOC cultural artist community, the organization was white-led, meaning executive leadership and board, for 4 decades until I became the ED 3 years ago. After I became the executive director in 2019, I shared my vision of centering artists and BIPOC voices with the World Arts West board. In 2020, when the staff became majority BIPOC, there was a very strong board pushback against this direction. The staff and I began to experience a great deal of sustained racial harm from the board. While the board loved seeing cultural artists performing on stage, having BIPOC artist voices as part of the organization's leadership actually felt threatening to the board. Because I wanted to believe that World Arts West was an organization committed to diversity in a liberal geographic area of the San Francisco Bay Area. It actually took me a long time to realize that many of the board's behaviors, such as unreasonable excessive demands of perfectionism, micromanaging, and microaggressions, were actually characteristics of a white supremacy culture. And that I, a highly competent, highly successful, highly seasoned executive director, can feel paralyzed and terrorized in a hierarchical structure of a nonprofit organization that aims to serve a large BIPOC constituency. As the World Arts West artist community began to hear about what was going on, they formed a cultural artist solidarity coalition, reached out to the board, and demanded a list of changes, such as onboarding BIPOC board members and onboarding cultural artists that had nominated to join the board, as well as ceasing the behavior of regular harassment of the executive director and staff and commitment to DEI work. With the push of this cultural artist solidarity coalition in 2021, the World Arts West board evolved from majority white to 100% BIPOC. Today, the World Arts West board and staff are majority BIPOC and cultural artists, reflecting the extremely diverse artist community that we serve. I cannot tell you what a difference it makes to have BIPOC artist voices show up at all of our board and staff meetings, program design, community engagement, financial planning, operational management. We're at the tail end of a 6-month strategic planning process. Starting January 2023, we will implement the first World Arts West strategic plan, deeply rooted in our racial equity values. Today, the World Arts West staff, the new board, and community, we have so much healing ahead of us. We feel the pain of the historical trauma, and yet I feel a tremendous sense of hope of what's possible when you build an artist, community-centered organization that is for us, by us.
Woo! Let me take a moment there because that's a lot. Thank you, Anne, so much. I know it's a lot to talk about, to relive, but thank you for telling us who you are, highly competent leader. Thank you for sharing your origin story. You know, when we understand each other's stories, we can begin to embrace their humanity, and we can put it into context of who and where we are, right? So thank you for that. Yeah, I just appreciate you both sharing your narratives generally, but especially as marginalized folks, it takes an incredible amount of vulnerability to bring our whole self into spaces, especially those where we don't know how we will be received, right? But I've said a million times, the why, how does it matter? The fact that we do it consistently and we show up in spaces so that people can understand who we are is critical. And I imagine, you know, just the mental, emotional, physical labor of knowing that you were asked to take lead of an organization and only to be bullied and harassed in that moment, and continuing on in the work that you knew was necessary for your community. It's incredible to me. And Kelly, I remember that moment at Dance USA in 2012 in San Fran. I was there. It's a pivotal moment, not only in the organization's history, in the field's history, because many people witnessed what was inevitable, the change that was to come. And I think that was a push for the field. But it was a shift in your personal story. And that's important to note too. So again, thank you both. Thank you both. You know, I asked for your stories, one, because it's important to humanize the people in which we're in conversation with, in which we gather, in which we work with, which we're in community with. But two, I wanted to take the time to help contextualize what it is we're here to talk about. And part of that contextualization helps to ground us in our humanity. And I also want to help ground us in some history. So I want to talk to you all about kind of the nonprofit art sector. And so many of you already know this, but so you can further understand how Kelly and Anne are existing in this world, a sector that was not created for us. And so historically, as you all know, the nonprofit art sector, like much of the charitable sectors that began in the early 20th century, was composed of white American industrialists, men, some women as well, but looking to direct their wealth towards altruistic endeavors. And arts and culture was a big part of that. That was a favorable outlet. That's why you have all of the money and the accolades that go to the symphony, the orchestras, and the ballets. But these men and women that comprise the board of directors of these foundations and nonprofit organizations, and held leadership positions in the administration of some of those newly formed organizations, many that some of you work with today, and a century later, the makeup and the power structure, as you know, has changed very little. Although I will say things are shifting, lots has to be done. And we've talked about evolution versus revolution. What does that look like in our field? But I wanted to share something. I'll never forget in 2000, it was around 2012, 2013, actually it was the same time as the Dance USA conference, around that same time that that conference happened, about 10 years ago or so. Musical America published this magazine article, and it highlighted the movers and shakers in the performing arts field. So if any of y'all were still around during that time, and you remember the big books that Musical America still used to send out, you will remember that moment. And the movers and shakers highlighted all the executive, not all of them, but a good number of executive directors and CEOs of performing arts organizations. There was not one person of color listed in that influential publication, not one, not one. Those that they highlighted as movers and shakers. And so, you know, that's only 10 years ago. We have moved far from there. And while the field is not moving backwards, particularly as we've seen in these last 2.5 years, I feel that it stubbornly remains stuck in the past ideology and past methodology, while other industries seem to surpass us in thinking and doing, further exacerbating that gap of inequity that exists in our field. And so, you know, while we work to ensure that people of color are seated at tables with decision-making power, and find that as to be one step forward, diversifying and being more inclusive in our hiring and our retainment of leaders of color, those are only steps towards creating equity. Those are the objectives or the tools that we use to create equity, but they're not the goal. So BIPOC leaders' presence alone doesn't create racially equitable structures for our field. I'm gonna repeat that. BIPOC leaders' presence alone does not create racially equitable structures for our field. Why Black and brown folks? Black and brown folks, BIPOC leaders stepping into the field, leading historically white organizations, and that's what we're talking about today, historically and predominantly white organizations, is a relatively new phenomenon, which is strange to think about because like we're almost 60 years out from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which as a labor law outlawed discrimination in the workplace based on race, color, religion, sex, and nationality. But if we really looked at the systems constructed in this country at its beginning stages, I'm talking about, you know, back when Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton and all those dudes, they weren't built to be inclusive. No one ever imagined a Black or brown person running a foundation with $100 million endowment, much less becoming president of this country. So when we think about it, while the straws have been made and who is placed where, the systems remain. The systems of inequity, systems which champion and lift up white supremacy culture. And if you need some definition of what that is, they're going to drop in the chat a very good resource for you. And if you need a primer, we'll drop some more resources in the chat. But, and thank you for filling up the chat. But, you know, let's take a moment again to look at the past because it really doesn't look much different from the present. In the 60s, going back to the 60s, after the abolishment of Jim Crow laws, with our president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, signing the Civil Rights Act, there was a movement towards integration. And what that basically means is placing Black and brown workers into overtly hostile environments mired in white supremacy culture. Nowadays, we put Black and brown folks in environments to lead their workplaces and to lead organizations. And while there might not be overt hostility, although you heard from Anne's testimonial, there very much is, the environments are still mired in white supremacist values, which creates a broken culture. And that's where we are today. Over the past 15 years of work with our organization, Women of Color in the Arts, and particularly in the past 2.5 years, where this racial reckoning was happening and all those promises were being made. You remember those? Yeah. I've witnessed some very vibrant, dynamic leaders express lots and lots of frustration and distress walking into institutions in which they are hired to lead, but are not full in giving the opportunity to showcase their talents, to showcase the expertise and the knowledge that they were brought in to do the job. The expertise in which they were hired for. That's happened over and over again, and I don't need to point to the news. You can look it up yourself if you need further reinforcement. But there's this meme. I should have made it a part of our slide and shared it with you. But there's this meme that I love that Woka shared on social media, and it says, "When you hire BIPOC folk into a broken culture, you don't fix the culture, you break the people." So let that rest with you for a second. When you hire BIPOC folk into a broken culture, you don't fix the culture, you break the people. So we've posed a generative question or questions about how organizations in this particular case, because we are here in the Grant Makers in the Arts space, about how funders can help set up BIPOC leaders, specifically those in executive leadership roles that are leading historically and predominantly white organizations. How can you set them up for success? And, you know, while what constitutes success can be subjective, success, for the sake of our conversation today, and we can put it on the screen, Nadia, I will use the term success to mean a few things. Oh, great, thanks. There it is. Being able to be your whole self, being able to embrace your humanity on and off the job. So there's no fakery here. Who we are is who we are. And we need all of those parts in order to do our job well, right? Being fully embraced by your coworkers and colleagues and recognized for your talents, not just, you know, in theory, but in practice, not just because, oh, she got hired for the job, so she can do it. And yeah, no, being recognized and fully embraced for your whole self by your colleagues and your coworkers. Attaining the things that you need, for your professional and your personal development. What does that mean? And when I say professional development, whatever that is that our folks need in order to succeed. And your personal, because people think, well, you know, I need time off in order to uphold my caregiving responsibilities, whether that belongs to a child or an elder. And those are things that we have to factor in, but we can't factor in it if we don't understand people's humanity. Being paid your worth, that's pretty straightforward. Pay people. You brought them in, they have the expertise, support the work that's being done. And then being able to thrive even while facing adversity and the structural inequities that we all know exist and will continue to exist in our lifetimes until we change them. So those are some of the things that we consider as success, what success looks like for BIPOC folks, leadership that are leading these organizations. But it's all up to understanding the structural inequities that exist until we change them, we being everybody in this room. So speaking of change, I want to hand it over to Kelly. Kelly's going to talk to y'all about what we are doing to affect some change.
Thank you, Kaisha. And I just want to amplify one of the things you said, that we all need to be a part of the change. We all do have to be a part of it, because one of us cannot move it forward. So thank you for that reminder. We've got a poll that we wanted to enable. We really want to gauge in this space, what has support for BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color leaders, look like for you? There are many choices here, and at the bottom there is all of the above. So if you just kind of take a moment to review, and then make your selection. And if you do not see something like an option that you would respond to, if there's another way in which you think that BIPOC leaders can be supported, or that you've witnessed, or that is manifested for you, please do note it in the chat, and we'll make sure to grab that as well.
So Kelly, you want to read off the poll, the question in the poll answers?
Sure, I can read the potential answers. So, creating spaces of support for leaders of color, having honest, transparent conversations about the inherent racism leaders of color may face upon entering historically white institutions, investing in racial equity trainings and workshops for staff and board, investing in the hiring of support staff of people of color, helping to build bridges between leaders of color and potential funders to invest in their vision, publicly supporting the transition of board members that no longer serve the organization in which the leader of color directs, making financial investments in leaders of color, working to dismantle oppressive systems within the nonprofit industrial complex, and all of the above. Right, and if there are any additional ideas, please do add them to the chat.
Yeah, and so a couple of questions have come into the chat. So this is what has support for BIPOC, meaning Black, Indigenous, people of color leaders, look like for you. So you are responding to how the support has looked for you, like how the support has looked like for you inside of the work that you're doing, inside of the organizations that you are working with and through.
Are the poll results ready to be shared? Great. Can everyone see the results? Yes, no, thumbs up. Okay. So the highest, it looks like in a quick scan here, is having honest, transparent conversations about the inherent racism leaders of color may face upon entering historically white institutions. Personally, I would say that tracks. And then the next highest is all of the above, but also wanting to just acknowledge the second highest is investing in the hiring of support staff for leaders of color. I see someone put in the chat, caring about mental health. Yeah. Can folks not see the results? Okay.
I can see it, but maybe we just want to call out what it is, if there are any folks that are have called in for the.
Yes, okay, great. People can see it. People can see it. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Kaisha, Ann, is there anything that's surprising for you here, or anything that resonates? Someone just put in the chat, making sure that BIPOC folks, staff, board, advisory board have real decision-making and implementation power. Yes.
100%.
Is there anything that's surprising or affirming for the two of you?
Well, I love that almost half of folks put here having honest and transparent conversations about the inherent racism leaders of color may face
Yeah.
upon entering historically white institutions, because we're not clear that those conversations are actually happening, like really happening. Because one, you have to name a couple of things here, right? You have to name that racism does exist and it exists inside of your organization. You have to name that perhaps that your organization's values are being upheld by white supremacist values. So you have to unpack that and you have to dissect that. And then making sure that people understand someone that is coming in that historically has not been present in your organization, much less led your organization, that has different viewpoint and perspective, ways of doing and being, has to be acknowledged. So the fact that people are saying that they're having these conversations is really great to see.
A comment I want to make, and this is, I'm speaking from my own experience as well as the experiences I hear from other BIPOC EDs, being the first BIPOC ED of their organizations. And this is especially true for organizations that have been around for 30, 40 years plus. Is this I call this invisible board piece that is not visible to funders. And I shared a story that this was the deepest harm that the staff and I experienced. And I know next section, I do want to address that a little bit with Kaisha, but this collectively, the BIPOC EDs don't want to share with funders of what they're experiencing with the board and what holds the board accountable. Hence, the harm continues. In 2019, 2020, 2021, I wish there was a way for me to go to the board and go to the funders and let them know what was going on inside the organization. I almost did, and other nonprofit leaders and some trusted funder allies actually told me not to, because the funders may think that, oh, this is just your internal problem. So something as a sector I would love for all of us to work on is creating an environment where executive director experiencing what I've experienced, which is quite a few BIPOC EDs, can actually go to the funders and work with funders to hold their boards accountable. That is something concrete. I would love, for all of us to kind of work on together. And what does that look like? So love to have a conversation, begin to have that conversation with the funding community about that today. And then I have other things to say, but I'm going to wait till the next section.
Yeah, it sounds like,
I just was gonna, and then I will definitely swing it to you, Kaisha, but I'm so glad that you brought up the board piece, because I think it's surprising that only 14% of folks said that was something that is what they have noticed, or is a way of support for BIPOC leaders. You said it much more eloquently than I did, but the power and the control, and I just want to say, I mean, earlier on you used the word terrorizing, and the fear, using fear as a tactic to disrupt or derail a transformational change. I mean, I think is really, really important to note. So the fact that is one of the lowest pieces, to me, could demonstrate a place of opportunity. Yeah.
And, and speaking about folks speaking up, well, obviously we understand that it takes an intense amount of vulnerability to walk into a space and say, this is what's happening to me. And we are consistently gaslit when we tell our stories and say, and made to think, oh, this is only for this organization, or this is only happening to you, that it's not field wide. And I think the more we tell our stories, the more resonance it will have, and more people will start speaking out. In terms of how to get funders involved, I don't even know if that's the right word, with boards and the governance of our organizations. And we already talked about this, Ann and Kelly, about, you know, thinking about what governance looks like and the folks that are placed on boards, and also currently how it works currently, and also thinking about alternatives to that governance, how we're creating structures that is not like the traditional forms of governance that we have, so that all of the people that are involved in the work are empowered to do the work in the way that they feel fit, in the way that's in service to the communities that we are set to serve, and frankly, in the way that's right. You know, we all know what's right. There's a question or a comment in the chat that is saying something to the effect that it's hard for funders to respond constructively without understanding the full picture of the challenges. And that's where I would say, well, I feel like as someone that is working in support of organizations, in support of the leaders of the organizations, so people that are working to invest in the work of that leader and the work of those communities, you have to know the full picture. So more conversations, more dialogue needs to be had to understand the full picture and to put it into perspective and to put it into context, like hopefully we're helping to do today.
Mhm.
So let's move forward. Yeah, thank you all for that. I want to move into specifically the problems or some of the challenges that women of color are facing in the workplace. And Ann is going to lead us into that.
Kaisha, should we ask GIA team
To share the diagram. Yeah, so we have this amazing diagram for you all that was put together several years ago by a Canadian nonprofit called COCO. And they also have an incredible video that goes alongside this diagram. We'll drop that in the chat for you so that you can watch at a later date, but explains the experiences that and the challenges that women of color face in the workplace.
Yeah, so in this particular diagram, when Kaisha talks about, when Kaisha and Kelly both talk about our collective learning regarding the journey, the chronological journey of a BIPOC ED entering an organization, especially historically white-led institution, often it looks like this flow chart. And during this time, especially since 2020, there's great excitement and honeymoon period of the revolutionary decision for the organization to welcome and hire the first BIPOC ED, first woman of color. When that ED and oftentimes expecting, you know, the ED to kind of move mountains, right? Come in with all your vision and lead us. And that oftentimes is done without having a lot of dialogue regarding the historical structural challenges that that BIPOC ED may be walking into. And that was definitely lacking at Wards West when I first started working as an ED in 2019. Second, reality. Woman of color points out issues within the organization, tries to work within organization structure and policy. She pushes for accountability. Sometimes there's staff transformation. In this second step called reality, usually that's when the board resistance starts. And like Kaisha said, you know, there's a historical way why, you know, how these board members are recruited, the types of board members that show up, that maybe are, big donors, maybe are great for fundraising for the organization, but not so in touch with the constituency, and definitely, not so in touch with the conversation we're having today. The woman of color at reality stage may or may realize this is what's going on. I did not realize at this step 2 reality, I did not realize that is actually what was going on. There's often an awakening of the BIPOC ED. Oh my goodness, reality, step 2 is actually going on. Very often the BIPOC ED reaches out to other BIPOC EDs and other peers to try to respond to what was going on. Oftentimes I would use the word, and this is true in my case, the respond to the onslaught of resistance. Actually, at the response stage, I've actually seen a lot of BIPOC EDs leave their organizations. As the BIPOC ED continues to respond, oftentimes with other BIPOC staff, then the BIPOC ED begins to experience retaliation. At this retaliation stage, very frankly, I was not fully aware that I was experiencing retaliation. Because it was very much sort of couched in policies and bylaws and finance and so forth. When the retaliation gets very, very, very severe, oftentimes the BIPOC ED actually leaves the organization. In our case, during the retaliation stage, it was really our very, very large culture artist constituency that stepped up and called out the board. Then there was a mass exodus of the board, and with the brand new board that's around today. I want to say that our case at World Arts West is actually highly unusual. Very often this is the flow chart that we see. So Kaisha, do you want to make any further comments, or Kelly?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say that I know that we've talked about this infograph. This infograph is personally quite triggering for me. And one of the points of our conversation has been around dismantling and disrupting this, and the urgency and the intention that we need to have around that action. I'll say that for me, this infograph tracks in terms of experiences I've heard from other leaders and experiences that I've personally had. I think that what's important to understand is that while this may be, a beautiful visual representation of experiences that BIPOC leaders have had, that is very real. This is, white supremacy is real. It is something that is tactile, that leaders are experiencing, and you've shared your examples. One recent example that I can share around the communication piece, that retaliation. And while this chart is triggering for me, it's not. The experiences that I've personally had don't necessarily go in this like linear pathway. Going back to the conversation around the boards, at the Dance USA board level, we recently had a very significant vote to change, to ensure that our trustees are elected through a singular equitable process. And that was something that was not always the case. And in going through that process and explaining the why we needed to vote and doing the vote, and then having to kind of like catch the aftermath, this is when we get into the communication piece. And I do have to say that, you know, microaggressions and gaslighting are real. And I honestly have to say that I did it to myself in wondering, you know, am I communicating well, because of the way in which I was now being questioned, right? Like I had to prove that, you know, the work had integrity and the path that we were moving towards had integrity. And so that communication piece, I think, is really critical, where we get questioned and interrogated. And I'll go back to, you know, a word that you used earlier, and again, terrorizing and planting doubt and seeds of fear, and how it is real and it is definitely an embodied experience. So that's what I wanted to say about this infographic, that while it is beautiful, while it is static, it is very much a real experience that folks have. Kaisha, is there anything you wanted?
It is a real experience, and there's no doubt, at least in this room right here, that it exists. I imagine that many people, many folks that are working in the philanthropic space themselves are experiencing these, if they are a leader of color. And we know all of the feelings that this diagram can elicit. I want to talk about the steps for support. You know, we've given a little history, and thank you all for participating, dissecting, and unpacking this phenomenal diagram, which I encourage you all to, all of you in the room, to share with your folks. You know,
And Kaisha,
yeah.
hi, Sherilyn here. Before we go into the steps for support, I just want to let folks know who are listening, we have 15 more minutes. So drop your questions in the chat. So as we go through steps for support, we can also kind of do a Q&A type thing all at the same time. I know it might be a little challenging, but we do want to make sure we get to your questions. So go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll juggle both. Thank you so much. All right, back to you, Kaisha.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sherilyn. Yeah, we're going to talk about steps to support, but we also want to open up the room. We'd love for you to respond to anything that you've seen or heard here today. But specifically, we'd love to hear about how do funders view their work or their role within the context of supporting BIPOC executive directors. Some of you have dropped into the chat about perhaps some of the challenges and conflicts of working with directors and the board of directors of particular organizations. And we've given you, you know, we've outlined some things that we have seen and that we participate in, and how to support BIPOC leaders. But yeah, how can philanthropy assist? What steps have you seen funders take in supporting BIPOC leaders and helping to mitigate some of the harmful impact leaders of color face when entering into these new leadership roles? As someone said in the chat, I think that was, let me go back to Ava, you know, about when all the organizations were issuing their DEI statements and doing more quote unquote diversity hiring, they didn't fix the culture. They created a bait and switch situation for folks, and wound up having us lead in even more harmful situations. So we're opening up the room now. Of course, we're going to continue to talk about mechanisms and ways of support, but we'd love to hear from you all.
It looks like we've already got some in the chat from Jennifer and a few folks. We dropped some as well that were sent earlier on.
I actually want to take a moment to address Jennifer's question.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm sure she's not alone. The question is, what are some questions that white leaders who are funders can ask boards that can reveal the reality of BIPOC EDs? As we are continuing to learn about a common journey of BIPOC EDs, such as the great infographic that was shared today, in a way kind of simple but very powerful conversation that the funder can have with, for example, when the BIPOC ED is hired, is to have a meeting with the ED and the board chair, just to acknowledge that, you know, this infographic is a common journey, and that the funder is here to support the BIPOC ED, and the board chair, just for the board chair to hear that is, you know, for the board to hear that is very, very powerful. The funder does not need to really say anything beyond that. Like if I had that conversation 3 years ago, that would have really, really helped me. In fact, very recently, one of the funders said, after I shared the story, you know, they said, wow, Anne, I really understand. I got your back. This was my first time sharing, you know, this story I shared today with an individual funder. And I think when the board hears that, the board kind of sit up a little bit more and less likely behave in a way that takes the BIPOC ED through this infographic.
That's great. We've got a few more in the chat. The two that, oh, go ahead, Kaisha. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm reading through the chat too. Thank you so much
Great.
for putting your questions in there. Sherilyn, I don't know if this came from you directly or was a copy from someone else, but how would funders be able to hold boards accountable without potentially harming the organization's other stakeholders, such as staff, artists, etc.? You know, I'm thinking about this question because it's something that we've kind of pontificated on in other settings. But for me, like, all this stuff is kind of like Band-Aids. Like, we're not taking this to the root and addressing what the real issues are. So we can find different ways in which to assuage the situation. We can find different ways and where we take members out, board members out. We can find all of these different solutions, but if we're not addressing the root and that the system is not working for us, and how do we create a new system while still we have to hold on to the system that we have because that's what we're working on, right? But how are we creating a new system that will be in service so that we won't have all of these, what do they call it? When you have a fire, but it's not the fire that's impacting you directly, it's the thing, it's the smoke. There's a word for it. That's what I'm trying to get at. So all of these secondary things are not affecting us, right? And so for me, that's what I feel the bigger question is. But there are more questions that are coming into the chat. It says, in addition to the great idea from Anne, I'm curious what you think funders could require that could be of help. For example, in research grants, we require that practitioners are equally budgeted as researchers to ensure equitable participation. Can any such requirements be applied to boards? Great question. What do you think, Anne?
Overall, there are already so many requirements that funders give nonprofits. I would just say, like, this area of funders formally requiring their grantees more needs to be well thought out. Because I often think, like, and have experience, right, you know, with well-intentioned funders, okay, let's make this additional requirement, but then there's sort of various consequences that could be harmful to the BIPOC ED or the staff. I don't have any like straight answer regarding, oh, this is what all the funders should require. And I because, you know, I want to be mindful of the consequences that could happen, you know, based on my suggestion right at this moment. to ask the funders to have additional requirements of the nonprofits. I would say where we are right now really is understanding this journey of the BIPOC ED entering institutions, especially historically white-led institutions, and knowing that for the funders in the room that various grantees of yours, this could be their journey. Yeah, and please support them. And if they have a conversation with you, just please be non-judgmental, because I can guarantee now, based on the attendees I see today, some of your grantees are afraid to share their stories with you. Because why? They're afraid to lose their funding from you. That's been my case. That is currently the case of some of your grantees. You can go to them, the first BIPOC EDs in your grantee pool, and say, I just went to this GIN webinar on BIPOC EDs. If there's anything you'd like to share with me, if there's anything I could do to support you, please let me know. Be non-judgmental. Some of your grantees would really, really, really appreciate that. That is a concrete suggestion I have for the attendees today. Sorry, Kelly.
I think the only thing I was going to add, based on what you were saying, is, and if the conversation veers towards or is approached from a framework of, and how can we, the funder be supportive, if your grantee is asking you for something or is asking for your trust or your support in other spaces, lean into it. And I share that from my own experience, where I've been told no when I've been asked, how can we support? And I've been very clear on how that support could show up. And it's when you are in this position, working, leaning into wanting to manifest the change, knowing that there is, I don't want to say stamp of approval, but knowing that there is support around you to move the work forward or ahead is a tremendous weight, or it eases the valve a bit. And I just want to note the comment that was made in the chat that kind of nods to this, where the individual says, I think there's also work on the funder side. Funders have to do the work to build BIPOC leaders' trust, funders as a resource, and protect them from penalization within our own systems, and more voices of boards making change, like Woolly Mammoth's publication. So there's definitely a coming together that needs to happen with the leaders and whomever their funders are, or the community.
Yeah, that's real. Thank you. Is it Nyasa? Nysa? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but please feel free to speak up and say that we acknowledge when folks are in need and acknowledge the support. So my experience has been is that folks, specifically funders, might support you in private, but publicly do not come out and say, these are the experiences that this grantee or potential grantee is facing when in their own circles. That in itself is harmful, because you're now perpetuating or not perpetuating the authentic stories. You're just leaning back into the old systems and saying, okay, well, we'll support this if and. Yeah. And this is really harmful for our organizations. It really is. When we have authentic allies that are moving with us, and the support is solidarity. I mean, for me, that's the baseline, the very first step, that you're in solidarity with me. not only do you, have you heard what we're expressing are the challenges faced inside of the organizations, but you are walking with us and speaking up on our behalves with advocacy and advocacy. That's how we get to the next level for me.
Mhm.
Thank you for that, Kaisha. We have 2 more minutes. There's another question in the chat, and I see folks are kind of engaging together. So we can either spend a little bit more time with the questions, or if you have like one final mic drop thought you want to share, and know that attendees know that we will leave the email addresses of the presenters if we don't get to all your questions. So I'll leave it to you 3.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any mic drop
Okay.
moments.
Job,
Um,
Kaisha, come on.
I will just wrap us up and thank you all that have engaged in the chat. These are lots of questions, inquiries and comments to think about as we move outside of this session. What is learned here should definitely leave here. But I'll wrap up by taking us back to the conversation that was originally envisioned and the description that Sherilyn shared with you at the beginning of the session through the title of the session. And evolution is a process, talking about evolution versus revolution. Evolution is a process of gradual change over a long period of time, often over generations. And in contrast, we have revolution, which means a sudden, a complete and radical change. There is nothing radical in hiring Black, brown leaders, BIPOC leaders, giving them a cape like they're Superman and asking them to transform organizations without giving them the tools and the support that they need to do it. That's harmful. And that's been happening to BIPOC leaders over and over again. And so, let's collectively take all of the wisdom and the resources that are in this room to work to dismantle the systems that thwart their ability to thrive, not to put Band-Aids on them, not to fix one challenge and then be sidled with the next challenge that comes. And we've already started talking about a lot of great solutions here. I'm just going to invite you to stay connected, to keep this conversation going here and in the space inside and outside of your networks. All the resources have been dropped into the chat. I want you to encourage you to support leaders of colors. We gave you multiple ways in which to do that. And I want to thank Kelly Aduse of Dance USA and Anne Wong of World Arts West, that 2 women that are truly bringing transformative change, not only to their organizations, but to the field. And you need to support them. So thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Kaisha. Thank
Yeah.
you. And Woman of Color in the Arts, for leading this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, all 3 of you. All of the thanks to everybody, truly, because this was such an informative conversation. We had a shorter version of this at the conference. This is a longer, more extensive, detailed version. Still not enough time. So hopefully we'll find more ways to keep the conversation going here at GIA and outside of it, as Kaisha said. The presenter emails are on your screen, also in the chat. So feel free to reach out to them if you have direct questions. We'll also have a survey that just found its way to the chat. Thank you. Let us know what you thought of the presentation. We love your feedback and it helps us to decide on future programming. This presentation has been recorded. Everyone who's registered will receive the recording, will receive the contact information of the presenters, will receive the resources and materials. So you can be on the lookout for that. And finally, if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, Sherilyn Seeley at sherilyn@giarts.org. And thank you so much for joining us on our last webinar of 2022. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.